Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, for today's episode on fixing D20 Modern, we're up to part 6, and I figured at this point this is where I'm going to throw in a quick addendum as well as just kind of touch on the subject of using magic within D20 Modern. Uh, Magic is definitely an interesting thing, especially since with D20 Modern, it's been scaled back significantly. You're not able to advance on to, those awesome 7th, 8th, and ninth level spells, but it does kind of make sense, though, because you're playing in a setting that has relatively lower magic. And although the rule books in and of themselves keep everything at that lower level magic score, in reality, there's nothing really to stop you from adding some stuff in, from advancing things a little bit further. You might have to retool and rework some of the classes a little bit. My first bit of advice regarding that would be make the more advanced magic spells part of different prestige classes like the Archmage and things like that, or even make new prestige classes. The prestige classes are relatively simple considering that there's only 5 levels for them in the D20 modern setting. Well, the rulebooks, so many different settings overall. But before we really start digging further into that, the addendum I wanted to throw in was something that occurred to me after the first episode, taking a look at the base classes and the different class abilities you could select. And namely, it was the fast hero. I had kind of glossed over the sneak attack, and really, I should have elaborated a bit more. I mean, certainly, I went on at length when it came to the fast hero and dedicated hero. Fast hero, smart hero, and dedicated hero, pardon me. Those class abilities, I spent a great deal of time and work retooling, but I didn't really give a whole lot of uh, thought, or at least I didn't expand on my thoughts when it came to the fast hero and their sneak attack class feature that I had suggested as an option. And so, to that end, here we go. For the fast hero, with the sneak attacks talent tree, starting off when you first pick it, when making a melee attack against a flat-footed target, a target denied their dex bonus, or flanking a target with an ally, you may deal an extra 2d6 points of damage. And then, of course, when you select Sneak Attack 2, you need the first one as a prerequisite. And your sneak attacks deal an extra 1d6 points of damage, and you may now choose to deal non lethal damage with your sneak attack. And then, of course, when you bump up to Sneak Attack 3, your sneak attacks now deal an additional 1d6 points of damage, so you're at a nice total of 4d6, and you can now do sneak attacks from 20 feet away. And the reason for the 20 feet away is you're needing to be precise. You need to be accurate. And so, especially even using a ranged weapon, so you are taking the time to be careful and line up that shot. And the further and further away you get, obviously, the more difficult it gets. And really, that level of precision is not necessarily reliably possible in the midst of a fight. And and of course, though, you can always adjust this if you want. You can rewrite this to be 30 feet out, or the first range increment of a ranged weapon. Something like that that can be relatively fitting, and you can even stipulate as your own additional rule that feats like far shot or using scopes, things like that, when it comes to firearms or ranged weapons that will allow for some kind of scopes attached to them, you can allow that to extend the range somewhat because you're getting a closer, well, a more enhanced view of your target and are able to presumably aim with more accuracy and hit more precise locations. So that can help to make things a little bit more viable, a little bit more flexible, and are some options to consider when it comes to dealing sneak attacks. And of course, I'd say make this so it's stackable with the gangster advanced class. And you obviously want to probably want to cap that damage at some point. Maybe leave it so that way if the sneak attack is increasing from another source, this still will automatically cap off at 10d6 or something to that effect. But that's just, like I said, one option. And the goal here with this is it does add a new cool feature to the fast hero, but it's forcing players to choose between two good features. The defensive talent tree is mechanically the better option just because it keeps you from taking so much damage and just improves your defensive abilities and reflex saves in a game setting where reflex saves are all that much more important with grenades, automatic fire, explosions, all different kinds of sources of damage that will provoke reflex saves. But by throwing out this option, which is just a classic archetypal thing for your sneaky, stealthy, backstabby kind of rogue character, this will still make players go, I could take one point of the defensive talent tree, maybe two, and then max out 3 sneak attacks, which, yes, they'll still get some good defensive benefits out of it, but it won't quite be as exacerbated. And not only that, but say the players go on to another class that adds into that defensive talent tree, gives them their uncanny dodge and things like that, and helps build off of it. It helps prevent redundancies within those builds. So there still is a certain amount of optimization, maximization, and game breaking qualities to the characters, to the classes, and the different builds you can throw out there. But it still just feels a bit more complete, a bit more balanced, and allows for just a little bit more variation. And also by scaling back the fast heroes' defense progression somewhat, this just helps to make the fast hero, it's still a good class, but it's not so automatically overwhelmingly such a good choice that every build will benefit from it. I mean, still, you could argue that yes, most builds will still benefit from having fast hero, but it's not quite as extreme. But that's not the only subject for today. This is just the addendum. I wanted to discuss magic somewhat briefly here. Magic within D20 Modern occupies a fairly unique position, particularly considering that for the setting, well, for the rules, magic has been scaled back fairly significantly. You're not accessing high-end 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells, things like that. You're cut off about mid-tier through the spell list for both arcane and divine magic. So what this means is, especially given the technological level of the modern setting, you're in a situation where non-magic characters can have damage outputs similar to their magical counterparts if you're allowing magic in the setting. Not only that, but technological devices are able to replicate the effects of several spells. I mean, maybe you can't quite get a delayed blast fireball like a wizard could from Pathfinder or D&D, but a non-magic character can set up tripwire bombs, things like that, or just radio detonated explosives and the like that can deal significant amounts of damage without having to be anywhere near close to the targets that they're trying to attack. And not only that, but some rockets in the game deal 10d6 points of damage. So do fireballs and lightning bolts. So there are many ways for, like I said, for non-magic characters to keep up with those magical counterparts. I mean, text messaging, cell phones, that replicates the effects of sending spells pretty reliably and pretty awesomely. And not only that, but you can use PDAs and different storage devices as spell books for your different wizards. And although the magic levels are capped about mid tier, there's really nothing in the rules saying that you can't introduce 7th level spells, 8th level spells, all these different advanced magics, or just start even importing spells from Dungeons and Dragons into the game that maybe didn't quite make it over. Maybe in enhancing these spell lists and adding more in, maybe you can't quite add them into the mage class, let's say, without really disrupting things and maybe needing to add class levels, but you can add them in with new homebrewed prestige classes. And certainly this is easier to get away with when it comes to prestige classes, just because, well, there's less that you have to do because, per the rules and for most of the settings, prestige classes only take 5 class levels, while the base and advanced classes have 10 levels apiece. So, introducing magic via prestige classes definitely becomes much more tenable. Although naming the classes might be tricky, maybe you have to rework the Archmage or the Artificer advanced classes a little bit, but hey, you know what? It's certainly easier to work with in that instance than trying to just retool an advanced class that has 10 levels allotted to it. Certainly, balancing all of that is significantly easier, especially when you're dealing with prestige classes that are going to be more high level characters, anyways. So, the other thing to bear in mind with magic is not all spells are created equal, and I don't quite have the time to go over all the spells. This would make this video incredibly long, and while I do think I have a relatively decent speaking voice, my voice would get monotonous and drone on, and people would not watch the whole way through. At least I don't think so. And I'm not really willing to bet on that, nor spend that many hours putting together such a video. At least not yet. So, magic is interesting, useful, and unique, and most of the classes that utilize magic, your advanced classes, are going to be fairly high tier classes just because magic allows you to affect so many different things with the mechanics of the rules affecting the action economy. It does so much for you, especially when you have things like haste and mage armor. There's incredibly useful spells. And also, within the modern setting, I would argue that Fireball is significantly much more useful, especially when you consider that there aren't quite so many monsters and creatures that have fire immunity. Not only that, but there are so many flammable and combustible things. I mean, every vehicle runs on gasoline, and certainly electric vehicles are not going to like getting fireballed either. That's going to produce some very interesting effects. So, magic is one of those things that is incredibly useful, but it mainly applies to the modern setting, or even settings like post apocalyptic settings, or the past setting, urban arcana, obviously. But when you get into the future setting and the rules there, especially with all the technology, that technology really begins to make magic fairly useless, or at least not anything special. And because every character can start producing fireball like effects or lightning bolt effects. If I recall correctly, there's actually a weapon called the lightning gun, which basically just fires electricity in just a nice, long, searing, crackling line. And it's terrifying. It's horrifying the amounts of damage that you can put out in the future setting, just with the rules written as they are. It alters things so much, and so when you're using stuff out of the future setting, I would recommend extracting the advanced classes, but leave a lot of that technology behind if you can. Some of the classes are just so thoroughly dependent on it, especially if you're doing anything out of cyberscape, where a lot of cybernetic augmentations are really important. It's extract what you can, what's useful, what's fun, add it into your game, but don't fully import all of that stuff from the rule set, because it really starts to screw with the balance of, say, if you're trying to mix the future rules, settings, and equipment wholesale in with, say, Urban Arcana, there's really not going to be a lot of reason other than just aesthetics, and that's what the players want to play as, to pick up magic oriented classes. There's not a lot of reason for them to pick up psionic classes necessarily. I mean, certainly those things can still be fun and useful, but when you have a wizard with a gravity gun that has infinitely much more ammo than they have spells, their spells may end up getting kind of forgotten a little bit. I mean, when there's so many different shields in there that help enhance damage reduction and energy reduction, it can make some of the spells feel sort of useless, especially when you consider that they can pick up a gyrojet rifle that punches right through the shields, potentially in some cases, and ignores all the energy, damage reduction, and the like. And yeah, you can see how this starts to really escalate and become a bit of a problem. So be careful when you're mixing different things from the different support materials. D20 Apocalypse and Urban Arcana mix together fairly well, although some of their advanced classes are not the greatest. But those things can and do mix fairly well. But Future is one that's kind of risky to mix in with magic settings. Apocalypse and Future mix fairly well. The base rules for D20 Modern and Future obviously mix very well, but not all things are created equal. And like I said, avoid mixing magic as much as you can. If you do decide to mix the two, then definitely be prepared to do a little bit of your own home brewing, tinkering, and adjusting, just to keep things from being skewed a little too much. And definitely for that, I would say have those prestige classes ready and available, or give players a way to access higher level magics that allow them to do more through different magic items. Let's say, rods, staves that allow them to have access to these really potent spells, just to make them feel a bit more distinct and unique from the technology using classes and characters that are inevitably going to be present. So, but with that, we're going to leave it there. I may put down the Fixing D20 Modern guide for a little bit in favor of moving on and talking about some other games. I'm debating on going through and taking a look at some of the different advanced classes. I may take a look at more the what you might consider the lower tier classes, the classes that are just kind of busted in bad ways, classes that can be easily replaced or replicated with a feat or even two feats, depending. So that'll be up in the air. But for now, if you liked today's video, then go on down there and hit the like button and let me know. And if this has not been your first stop and you've been enjoying content here so far, go on down there and hit that like button. Certainly we'll be happy to have regular members here at the Gamers Den. And if you've been enjoying content overall, over here are some videos that you may also enjoy. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your Master of Lore and Storyteller Extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.